Hello to the good people of the left transhumanism Facebook group. I am going to praise you and acknowledge you for a few seconds to see if this live stream doesn't drop off. Oftentimes, when I post directly to groups, live streams drop off because I've been shadow banned for not being a fascist for many, many years, especially here on Fashbook. Um, but it looks like it's still going, so I guess we're okay. Um, you can see the title of this um, talk is to do with things, the two things perhaps most related to the transhumanist or techno-utopian worldview, advanced computing, and indefinite lifespan, more or less in that order, definitely in that order. Um, and I'm going to talk a little bit. I I should have made some more notes. I usually have more notes when I do this, but I'm going to talk a little bit about why those things are actually problematic and why um, almost every person that's identifying as a transhumanist really you'd be doing better work if you were just living in a tent on the side of the freeway or playing video games all day. By and large, what you're doing is extremely counterproductive. That is, particularly if you live in the United States and are trying to work with organizations ostensibly committed to this kind of purpose here. Um, so um, I have talked on a lot of these shows about this difference between an AI takeoff, an advanced computing takeoff, which the effects of which are frequently overstated. Right? Linus Torvalds, who's not a cyber communist or a transhumanist, um, or a scientific socialist, the three kinds of people of interest to me, um, um, are is very broadly speaking, was in the news this week for describing the developments in machine learning and large language models and the overall tech sectors known as AI as being 90% hype, which is a very, very accurate statement. Um, but Linus Torvalds, who is a rare Westerner working in technology, who has made a net positive contribution to this, um, the things suggested in this title, is nevertheless, in my opinion, not a person who is, if you're going to criticize tech sectors, you should really first say these two words: people's superintelligence, right? If you're going to criticize these things and their failings, you should perhaps have the presence of mind to suggest an alternative that is better, because I think we are going to be experiencing some kind of AI takeoff effects, irrespective of whether the people's superintelligence, that's to say a mass movement, to build something like an open source large language model workgroup that would be a workforce multiplier for large numbers of people and would then have the effect of creating something powerful enough to put pressure on the fascist United States and fascist West, and more particularly perhaps the sectors that represent the industrial bases that are causing capitalism's climate apocalypse. That's every climate scientist says we will reach runaway overheating around 2029 if we do not dramatically transform these industrial bases. And you won't find a tech accelerationist who's actually actively trying to do that, or actually actively trying to build a movement along those lines. And that is basically the essential problem in the title of, of this talk, which is not short. I could have perhaps made it a little shorter. Um, Contrasting um, the so-called singularity, a pretty laughable concept, with the people's superintelligence, and contrasting biological immortality by any standard of, in historically speaking, also a laughable concept, um, with the possibility of an AI-powered public health service that's effectively able to treat aging as a disease, leading to indefinite lifespan for all who want it. I would like to think that that's a realistic prospect in the course of the 21st century, but I have not met advocates for biological immortality who are actually not just a part of the problem. They're all shitting the bed, just selling snake oil and upholding the for-profit death care system of the United States that kills very conservatively in this ongoing epidemic situation that we're living in, about 75,000 people in the United States a year. And if you consider all of the downstream effects of not having public health service, um, overall, it's probably more like 200,000. And so, but find a person who has it on their resume that they're interested in a radical life extension, who is not also supporting the current system of a public health service, a lack of a public health service, but a for-profit death care system. You won't find them. You really won't find them. I came into this world of taking an active interest in this set of disciplines. That is rather naive, assuming that I would maybe find like 50% of the people who weren't just complete pieces of shit. That wasn't the case, um, and this forced me to go back and hit the books again and make a serious study of these disciplines to do with the building of a humane and sustainable economic system, generally those to do with Marxist-Leninism or scientific socialism, and also to try to make a more serious study of of this less well articulated discipline of cyber communism, which I would like to think that I could, in time, perhaps make some contribution to myself. But I guess I will recommend a book that I've read in recent days along these lines, written by people who would probably be described as problematic. But this book itself has some interesting insights, and it's called AI Snake Oil. And if you follow this sort of thing closely, you're probably familiar with the two writers of this book, and I don't have the titles to give them their proper homage in front of me. But the reason that these two people are problematic is not because really of most of the content of this book that is critical of these of this thing that is quite correctly, as Linus Torvalds said, 90% bullshit. The AI, this AI business, but the reason that they're problematic is probably the reason that almost everyone in this group is problematic, and the reason why almost everyone who self-identifies as a transhumanist is problematic is because you're not trying to put power in the hands of people. You don't even recognize that as your goal, and you don't recognize that the way to do that, the way to build a humane and sustainable world, is to build a humane and sustainable economic system. And the only opportunity to do that is to uh, is for a large number of people to begin fighting for the end of elitism, which is the end of private wealth. Um, this shouldn't be complicated, right? But you, almost anyone watching this in a group like this, will immediately start trying to change the subject. Um, um, but even this thing, the 75,000 to 200,000 people a year who are dying because of the neoliberal mandate of the United States, the far right mandate of the United States, a for profit death care system that I've described. You can put a number in various countries on the people who have died because of the neoliberal mandate of privatizing utilities, right? So you can say thousands of people have died in the UK since the Thatcher era privatization of utilities because having public goods, basic services provided to you, as opposed to extremely limited for working people, is a situation where, hey, you know, if your power gets cut off because you're poor, if there is some kind of an emergency of any kind, it's a pretty good thing for you to continue to have electricity. But under privatized utilities, that's denied to a huge number of people worldwide. A huge number of people worldwide, and a certain percentage of them die as a direct result. Just as we can say 75,000 to 100,000 United States people are dying because of the for-profit death care system. And you won't meet a person in this group, probably, or, there's 200 some people in this group, right? So maybe two or three of them are people who actually believe in ending elitism and private wealth and actually addressing the problems of this world. Um, but by and large, you should all just leave this group and join the group that's called liberal transhumanism, or far right dogshit transhumanism, or whatever the other groups are called, right? Because you're not really trying to do the right thing, and you know this. Um, you know, I I was going to talk about this controversy with the United States Transhumanist Party, where some people on the periphery of that organization. It's not a controversy, right? Because nobody gives a shit about transhumanists, and they would, if you're the kind of people organizing to build a people's superintelligence, or organizing to build a public health service that treats aging as a reversible condition. They would respect you then. They don't respect you now because they recognize that you're no different than, there's an election in exactly 7 more days in the United States. It's between two Zionist, militarist, highly fascistic in their um, foreign policy candidates, Donald Trump and um, um, Kamala Harris. Those two people are very likely to be the next president of the United States, one of those two. There are other candidates in the race. We live in a strange time. It's not impossible that Jill Stein or Ben Zion, who's running, you can write Ben Zion in as a write-in candidate and actually support the building of a cyber communist world. Um, it's not impossible that one of those two people would not be president, but it's extremely likely that one of these two people who has this far right neoliberal mandate and an even more egregious foreign policy. Uh, and the reason that's the more egregious thing, the reason that is the far worse thing than anything else, is that the United States is $1 trillion a year military industrial complex, itself the world's worst polluter. It's dramatically worse than that, however, because its only real job on the world stage is protecting other super polluters of a comparable level of criminality. which effectively creates a global regime of super pollution, which every one of you know, people in left, ostensibly left transhumanism, people in liberal transhumanism, people in far right dogshit transhumanism, and everyone else in this world, practically everyone will say, when prompted, I don't want humanity to be extinct because of runaway overheating from capitalism's climate apocalypse. Would like to see another outcome, but that means nothing, right? The liberal saying that they don't want bad things to happen to minorities when they overwhelmingly support the economic policies that kill minorities, that's a meaningless statement for them, coming from them. It's lip service. Similarly, with capitalism and climate apocalypse, we have 5 years left, less than 5 years left, before this runaway overheating's reached. And in that time, we have to dismantle things like the military industrial complex. We have to dismantle things like um, corporations and even private wealth itself. That's the only option, right? We wouldn't be in this situation. We really wouldn't. The people's superintelligence would have already been built were it not for the fascist United States. Because you can point to these times in history where a technological planned economy of rudimentary kind was being built, but one that would have had a transformative effect on the rest of the world, such as the Cybersyn project in Chile that was being developed. And you can see how that was destroyed by the fascist United States, and by and replaced not only by the fascist Pinochet installed by the United States, but by, in a very real sense, the economic policies of people like the United States Transhumanist Party. That's to say, the Chicago Boys, neoliberal, far right garbage that kills people by denying them basic services. Worse than ordinary capitalism is the United States Transhumanist Party, which is also true of the two parties. So why would these people expect anyone to believe that their economic policies, which are the same as that of the worst country that's ever existed, the fascist United States, and its majority parties, that they are somehow an alternative? Well, you know, I'm reminded of this um, um, uh, 2020 presidential election, the first thing that I ever won. Somehow I won an election. It was the first open election for the United States Transhumanist Party, and there were people in that race who had more of a profile than I did at that time, like Rachel Haywire, lunatic. All the people in that race, you know, the ones that had the level of profile as Rachel Haywire at some point, they're just far right lunatics. Um, so, because I made a good faith effort to build a policy platform, I guess, and I tried to reach out to people, I ended up winning that thing. And so I started working with someone named Dr. Dan Elton, and around the time that it looked like I was going to win this thing, which was a bad idea, so I didn't realize that this person was just a person who had the exact same worldview as Rachel Haywire. That's to say, a fascist. And I should have recognized that most of these people in this organization are cops, right? Were like when I was there were like 10 people in the inner circle who had U.S. security clearance, some kind or other. Um, but so this person, Dr. Dan Elton, was he recommended this book um, called Zero to One by Peter Thiel. He said, "You got to read this book." I already knew what it was. I said, "Are you nuts?" But back then, I didn't take the position of specifically avoiding people who I knew to be rightist. which is not just my mistake. It's a mistake of everyone. You should be not working with these people. You do better work as a aspiring transhumanist, living in a tent on the freeway doing nothing, playing video games all day, than you do working with people like this. And so this person who said, "Yeah, I'm so glad that you beat Rachel Haywire, or these other weirdos." Not all of them were weirdos, to be fair. Um, um, but it is a community of rightist weirdos. But this person, this person, Zero to One was co-written by this Curtis Yarvin, formerly known as Mencius Moldbug, a fucking psychopath, right? A neo-reactionary technologist psychopath along the lines of Nick Land, who has written books a little more coherent, at least along these lines than Yarvin. But these are both just lunatics, right? So this person who was happy that I beat the neo-reactionary technologist was himself a person with the exact same worldview, and basically everyone that I encountered around that time in that organization were people on that part of the political compass, a bunch of psychopaths. So I was happy, very happy, that I ultimately turned down that endorsement as presidential candidate from the United States Transhumanist Party, which is just a CIA cutout for all intents and purposes. And it's not going to grow to be a big party. It could, if it did this thing, try to build people's superintelligence. But that would mean that it would no longer be dancing to the tune, as so many of these technologists and tech culture people do, of this arch fiend who wrote this book Zero to One with Curtis Yarvin, Peter Thiel. Most of these people have decided that they are going to pursue this techno-utopian outcome in the absolute worst way possible, by actually just helping people, a very few number of people, a small number of people who are already obscenely wealthy, to become, instead of being billionaires, to become trillionaires. And that exact equation of converting millionaires to billionaires to trillionaires, that's the exact same problem as this thing, capitalism, climate apocalypse. And this AI takeoff, the people's superintelligence that could have been built, would have already been built, with just, I think, just 10% less fascism in the world, right? Without the influence of the fascist United States, for example, destroying this illegally, contriving to illegally disband, as was done in the Carter administration with baiting the Soviet Union into the Afghan War. That was one of the biggest things there. Or contriving, not merely contriving to illegally disband the USSR, but just actively destroying Chile, right? And the technological planned economy there. Those two countries, for example, and or any scientific socialist not constantly assaulted by fascists, would have already built this thing, people's superintelligence. Would have, when in 1955 or 1957, when people working for international business machines and such, I said, well, we have this thing, we'll term it artificial intelligence. We're working on some pretty interesting advanced computing things that you're probably wholly unfamiliar with, and we expect that by maybe 1965, maybe 1975, we'll have artificially generally intelligent machines. Um, uh, they say, oh, those fucking idiots, right? But the fascist West sabotaged, actually, the building of such things. And by and large, that sabotage looks like building parallel sectors that seem to serve some function. By and large, they don't. Right? Like, what is this world of tech whales? Like, what are they actually fucking doing? It's just garbage, right? It's putting little dog ears on people. And it's just wall to wall garbage. It does nothing. It's a huge contribution to capitalism's climate apocalypse. And technologists mostly talk about this as if it's as an important set of service that's being provided, but it's nothing of the kind. um, uh, well, again, I'll just emphasize. I'm going to keep this one a little shorter, but I'll just emphasize that this thing that people in a group like this want, um, indefinite lifespan, um, you in this ongoing COVID era, and most of you are not. I mean, some of you are um, COVID cautious, but most of you are not also like vocally so. Like not actually trying to help other people do that and build a world where people wouldn't be at constant risk here. We're basically just killing working poor people with this COVID endemic quality that we're living with, and other such things, 100 other such things, the constant cullings. Um, but you're a thousand. It's not even calculable. Hundreds of thousands of times more likely to get COVID and then get COVID again and then get COVID again, as it may have well been designed by Western fascists as a bioweapon. But irrespective of whether that's true, um, you're very likely to get COVID again, get COVID again into your immune system, or your cardiovascular system just basically collapses and you die. You're far more likely to have that happen, thousands and thousands of times more likely to have that specific thing happen to you than you are to survive to indefinite lifespan. That's not a thing that any of the um, many billions of human beings that have existed, lived, and died before this time have ever experienced reaching indefinite lifespan. Um, and I think it's important to say that because almost no one has the sense of exigency about any of this in these tech communities, right? Because, so around 1910, and more solidly around 1930, people started developing actual public health services. And in the decades to follow, realized, oh, we can actually more or less control for people living to about 85 years of age if we control for things like this. A real single payer public health service, and other things that would contribute to the overall well being, like a housing authority that provides housing to all citizens, and other worker protections. And um, but the Americans, people like the people overwhelmingly active in the U.S. Transhumanist Party, they have not worked to see that people are pushing up to living to 85 years of age. They are doing the opposite, right? Um, um, Basically advocating for, or otherwise carrying water for, or certainly playing along with this for-profit death care system that kills 75,000 to 200,000 people in 2024, and um, that does come down to this elitism, this obsequiousness to private wealth, or the preoccupation with building private wealth. One of those two things. It describes almost every person in the West. Um, and um, we can So I see. I'm not going to call this person up by name, but there's a person who I've talked to who said, I recognize all of this about the U.S. Transhumanist Party or other tech organizations. It's probably of more interest to talk about other tech organizations because some of them are a good deal more influential than the United States Transhumanist Party. Um, and I recognize these problems, but I think that there is something of value in trying to reclaim that party or reorient that organization. But I would contend that if you're doing that, what most of what you are doing in these this tech culture preoccupations of the West, it's just culture vulture shit, right? You're not you're not doing anything. You're sharing some information with people that's already widely available in their tech news feeds, and you're reaffirming the neoliberal mandate generally of the thing that's hastening the death of the planet and the species. So that's doing nothing. That's doing less than nothing, and that's going to continue to be true whether the uh, the United States Transhumanist Party is controlled by just pure dog shit human beings like Chicago Boy types or not. It's still going to be the case that this $1 trillion a year abomination of the U.S. military industrial complex, the world's worst polluter, protecting all other super polluters, is going to exist. Um, and so you say, oh, well, I have a 100-year plan for turning the Transhumanist Party into something good. 100 years is not going to be anybody left. That's a basically foregone conclusion on the path that we were on. In 30 to 40 years, after 2029, that will be an unalterable path, more or less. So what do you do in that situation? Well, you stop being a fucking techno optimist, right? The dumbest person alive, if you're calling yourself a techno optimist, knowing what you know, you're in denial, but knowing what you know about things like capitalism's climate apocalypse and this U.S. fascist so-called rules-based order that's behind much of this. Um, it's not accurate to say all of this, right? There's other um, um, uh, private wealth entities in the world besides those based in the United States. But this is the U.S. system, right? The U.S. developed these kinds of things like the use of petroleum products of a great many kinds that were not even considered being used in other places, and kind of forced that upon the rest of the world. Forced other things along these lines of um, in different ways upon the rest of the world. And um, so, again, I will say there is no path for you in your lifetime, whether that be 20 more years before capitalism's climate apocalypse cooks you like a turkey, or whether you have a span of 80 more years or something. Um, there's no indefinite lifespan in your lifetime on the path that we are on, and there is no humanity at all on the path that we are on with the building of the fascistic superintelligence, which is not intelligence, right? The thing that kills humankind um, is not intelligent. The thing, a person that contributes to the death of the species by being a capitalist, by being this more fascistic minded person, that person could not possibly be intelligent. You might hear words coming out of their mouth that sound complicated. They might have something complicated going on upstairs. You know, Rachel Haywire and Dan Elton have some kind of complicated things going on upstairs, I guess. But it's not intelligence, right? Because the bare minimum of intelligence would be doing the things and thinking the things, to scientific socialists and people of this ilk. These are one and the same, or very similar. Praxis describes thought and deed. They would be doing and thinking things that would not contribute to the death of the species, right? That would be a, that's I don't see a lot of evidence of human intelligence by that standard. Um, so the fascistic military-industrial complex and its many organs and cutouts building things to do with um, uh, putative superintelligence, not superintelligence, right? But super stupidity. These things that are operating in this in their playing field in their arena is a mistake. It's the worst mistake you can make. It's worse than living in a tent on the freeway. It's worse than doing nothing and playing video games all day. So what's the alternative? Well, by some miracle, there are these things that are being developed that are highly agentic, open source large language models, which by themselves might be of some interest to you, right? You could maybe use a couple of them in a small business formation, for example, to maybe go from being a freelancer, making $20 an hour, to $80 an hour. That might allow you to have sushi money and make your condo payments or something, as opposed to living in a tent on the freeway. But that doesn't mean a hill of beans in this world that's dying because of capitalism's climate apocalypse in the fascist United States. Um, but at a scale, just like people started to realize in 1910 and by 1930, that at a scale we could build something that in one nation called a single payer public health service that would double the life expectancy, as the Soviet Union doubled the life expectancy in very few short years between roughly that time, um, 1920 and 1950, as China saw a doubling of life expectancy in the years after 1948, in roughly that same time, when they started doing these things, operating on this principle of building a public health service and such. Um, and that is a force multiplier, right? Force multiplier for ending illness, by the single payer effect. Similarly, this people's superintelligence, um, there is no superintelligence of using open source large language models of 2025 to 2030, let's say. Um, that's not going to be superintelligence. But they can be specially tailored. These, even if they're only 20% agentic enough to do anything, they can still be specially tailored to work with one another and overseen by a group of comrade users. And if 100,000 people started using agentic or semi-agentic open source large language models in this way in a high automation work group that was tasked with doing things like stopping capitalism's climate apocalypse or stopping fascism, that would be transformative, and that would be something closer to meeting that threshold of what I said of the barest minimum of intelligence, right? Of not contributing to the death of the species, as all of you basically are now. We live on this razor's edge where we are looking at either the oblivion of the species by, according to every credible climate scientist, in the next few decades, if we don't transform the economic base by 2029. But we are also looking at, I think, even that 10%, as Linus Torvalds said, of AI that isn't just pure, just hype, just garbage. Even that 10%, and in the course of some years, will demonstrate AI takeoff effects that could lead to things quite easily like universal super longevity, indefinite lifespan for all who want it, and the curing of other ills besides. Um, so don't be this person, as most of you have been, as techno-utopians and transhumanist type folks, who is continuing to be a part of the problem, because you've just ingested so much bourgeois propaganda, that you think that the only alternative is to work in that rigged, garbage way of working for ruling elites who say that they're going to produce this outcome, but are really only interested in consolidating private wealth to the detriment of humankind. Don't be that schmuck. I say this to people all the time, mostly scientific socialists and anarchists. You've met some stupid fucking people in your life, but you haven't met people as stupid as transhumanists, right? But that should just be, as I said, more of an indictment of humankind in general, not having that level of intelligence where we would have the ability to preserve the species. And But you don't have to be that person, right? No one's holding a gun to your head and saying you can't build a people's superintelligence. You can't begin to organize to that end and evangelize to that end, or that when you talk about things like the other major area of interest to techno-utopians, indefinite lifespan, no one's holding a gun to your head and saying that you would talk about it almost exclusively in terms of for-profit organizations, which are absolutely not going to provide that benefit to you. And the only thing that would provide that benefit to you, as I said, is the force multiplier of the single-payer public health service that's able to treat aging as a disease in the context of it being AI powered. And there's no need even this would you would just be, as in centuries past, you would just be immediately put in a mental institution in centuries past if you started talking all the time about indefinite lifespan. I guess nobody had any expectation that that could possibly be real, and so if you're talking about that, you're obviously quite mad. Um, I would still say that's basically true, but there is a narrow path to victory there, and that path to victory is mostly being muddied and made worse by the people who profess to have an interest in this, because of the bourgeois propaganda that you have taken in, that's clouded your thinking. And, that's talking to just the ordinary person on the street who's interested in, I think, something like techno optimism, right? But the people at the U.S. Transhumanist Party, they are the professional managerial class. They are part of the bourgeois. They're the people who are intentionally deceiving people. They're serving the interests of the big bourgeoisie, to the detriment of the continued existence of humankind. This, again, I made a mistake in the past of focusing on one person or this one organization even, but the problem is bigger than that, right? Because they're all neoliberal, just pigs, but so is every person in D.C. Right? Every That's to say, every kind of beltway power player type person who wouldn't describe themselves as a techno-futurist or something. So there, I hope, maybe some of you, I've tried to articulate in a more technical way approaches to this thing of people's superintelligence. I've tried to draw people into building that, but I guess I have more work to do there as a human being, as a citizen scientist, as an organizer, certainly. And so I haven't had the kind of success that I wanted. But some of you might have these resources at the ready, right? You could be working to build a people's superintelligence, but instead you're doing the opposite, right? You're helping Google build super stupidity. You're helping some other CIA cutout that's making the world far, far worse. Build super stupidity. What are you doing with your life? Again, like, if you can't do that thing, um, dedicate yourself to the actual ending of capitalism's climate apocalypse, which is the same as dedicating yourself to all power to the people, as opposed to elitism, as you are mostly aligned. Um, you're wasting your time. You're just wasting your time. But I do believe that we can do this thing. I think that with this approach to people's superintelligence, that the artificial intelligence singularity is near, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day, you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, dear comrade, with your help, very soon, techno-communism will win.